Hello, friends. Welcome to a bonus edition of the Locked on Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Saturday, actually. And today's podcast is myself and Ed Oliver of the Locked on Wizards podcast, who asked me to come on the show for the first of two crossover editions of the podcast in short form. So today's episode you're about to watch or listen to is actually about Delon Wright, who famously signed with the Wizards on a 2-year contract after leaving the Hawks last year. The Hawks had the ability to exceed the cap to sign him with bird rights, but Delon ended up going elsewhere. That made sense on some level, but I still wanted to have Delon back personally as a longtime supporter of his work. But alas, there we are. But Ed asked me to come on to talk about Delon, what he does on the floor, offensively, defensively, his role in the Wizards, what he did for the Hawks last year, etc. And that is coming up on the podcast. And hopefully you enjoy it. Please subscribe to this show across platforms, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, etc. And after a break for the intro, I'll come back and you'll hear Ed Oliver, and we'll talk about Delon Wright, the Hawks, and the Wizards.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Wizards podcast. It's your host, the real Ed Oliver. I just want to thank you guys for making Locked On Wizards your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. And today we have special guest Brad Rowland from the Locked On Atlanta Hawks podcast. How are you feeling today, Brad?
Just living the dream here in the offseason, of course. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. So the Hawks made some big moves, bringing in DeJounte Murray, giving up a couple first-round picks. But today we just want to talk about the addition, the Wizards adding Delon Wright. Just want to get some insight from you on how he was and, you know, why you guys didn't bring him back in free agency, just to give the Wizards some insight on what kind of player he is, just a scouting report. My first question is, how surprised were you that they did not retain Delon Wright in free agency?
Not terribly surprised, only because of what you mentioned. Like DeJounte Murray kind of changes the calculus a little bit for the Hawks. I personally, just to kind of not bury the lead here, I would have still brought him back if I was the Hawks. Mm-hmm. But I do think there was a little bit less urgency once they got Murray, who they are going to task with being kind of the backup point guard in addition to playing with Trae Young. And I think that, as we saw, Delon was going to have a real market. Like, he got a real multi-year solid money contract somewhere else. And I think if he had gone for less, it would have looked a little bit sillier for the Hawks to not bring him back. But the combination of the Hawks kind of trying to avoid the tax and also bringing in Murray kind of unlocked it to where I wasn't too surprised, even if I would have liked to see him back.
Right. Definitely. You got some firepower there with DeJounte Murray and Trae Young now. But the Wizards they're looking for a pass-first point guard, a guy that can shoot the three better than what they had last year. The Wizards were dead last in three-pointers made throughout the whole season. You talk about Delon Wright's offensive game and what he brings to the table.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say this. I know my listeners are probably laughing, but I love Delon Wright. He's a guy I've always really valued. The one thing he is not necessarily is a like super traditional run your offense point guard. Like, he can kind of do that. He can get you into your stuff, but he's not going to be a dynamic scorer. Like, he's a pretty low usage player in a lot of ways with his current role, but he does check a lot of positive boxes. Like, I think he's a very solid passer, even at point guard. He's a very solid shooter. We've seen the last few years, like, it's pretty low volume. He's not going to be a bomber for you, but I think for the last 3 or 4 seasons, he's been shooting like somewhere in the 37-38% range. Mm-hmm. And he has to be guarded. If nothing else, he's not going to just keep, he's not going to take 5 a game, but he's been taking 2 or 3 a game and shooting pretty well. And the big thing with the line is, like, he doesn't take anything off the table. That's probably one of my favorite things about him, especially when we're getting into the defense, I'm sure, as well. But he's more of a caretaker on offense. He can get to the rim. He can finish at the rim. He's not going to like blow you away offensively, but he definitely does not like hold you back a ton. He's probably best suited to play with somebody else that can kind of create, a la Bradley Beal, of course, in Washington. What you don't want to have is Delon be like your only creator. But I think that as a secondary guy, as somebody who kind of run your offense, he does a lot of those little things very well.
Mm-hmm. And how is his playmaking ability? How do you see him fitting next to Bradley Beal?
I think it's a good fit for him, all things considered. I think that he did a lot of his best work in Atlanta actually next to Trae Young because Delon has really good size. He can play, not necessarily the 2, but he is he's capable of playing off the ball a little bit. Like, obviously, you're going to want Bradley Beal to have the ball in his hands a decent amount, being that he's a high usage kind of star level player. Not quite the same level as Trae as far as on the ball is concerned, but Delon is comfortable on the ball and off the ball, which kind of gives him a lot of flexibility. And I think he is best paired, honestly, with a another guard, whether it be more of a point guard style guy or like a Beal who can do a little bit more of the usage stuff. If you're pairing him with someone in the backcourt that is not going to be a high usage guy, you might have some creation trouble because he's not exactly the most sort of ball dominant guy. But going back to like Dallas, Memphis, even Toronto early in his career, he can do a little bit more offensively if you ask him to. So I think they're going to fit pretty well together. You're definitely going to sort of keep the ball in Beal's hands as much as he wants, probably in the way that the Wizards probably are going to be doing. But I think Delon, being the fact that he does not have to have the ball to be successful, he's a good cutter, but also can create a little bit on the ball, can run pick and roll for you, can distribute for you, and that kind of be that lower usage but still pretty solid point guard option.
Definitely, yeah. So he'll be playing with Kristaps Porzingis. Most likely, he'll be coming off the bench behind Monte Morris, but he'll be playing with some lob threats. I know you guys had Clint Capella and John Collins, 2 lob threats there, and also Onyeka. But looking at Delon's minutes, he had the least amount of minutes since his career since 2017. Why was it tough for him to get on the court as much? And he also said, he was quoted to say that he feels like he wasn't used to the. I'm paraphrasing, but he in a recent interview he did. He felt that he wasn't used to the best of his abilities in Atlanta. Why do you feel that he didn't get the amount of minutes that he did not get since 2017?
Yeah, first of all, I agree with him. I think he should have played more and was kind of calling for that during the season. They were in this weird spot where they brought Lou Williams back, and I love Lou. I've actually, I'm the same age as Lou and played against Lou in middle school and known him for a long time. But Delon was a lot better than Lou, but they brought Lou back as a veteran. He commands respect, and I think that Nate McMillan kind of leaned on him a little bit too much in that backup point guard role. They played Delon a little bit off the ball. Eventually, by the end of the season and into the playoffs, they kind of sort of excised Lou from the rotation, allowed Delon to play more. We saw in the playoffs, actually, he was one of their best players in the playoffs. He was one of the only guys that played well in that playoff series. But I think that really is as simple as they played Lou too much, and they had another prominent veteran backup. Plus, having Trae Young on your roster, Trae's going to play. How much he's going to play, that's very clear. Whereas they kind of had these 2 point guard options that were very different players behind Trae, and sometimes they leaned on Lou too much. And while Delon can play off the ball, having him play very little point guard for most of the season kind of capped his minutes. I think he would have been better suited playing more, honestly, than Lou did.
Definitely, yeah. And I think I know he is somewhat of a combo guard, but I think he will be good coming off the bench for the Wizards. I like how you brought up the playoffs, how he played well against the Miami Heat. I know he had one of the highest plus minuses in that series for the Hawks, so that bodes well for Delon Wright. But I do want to get to talking about him defensively. The Wizards were ranked 25th in defensive efficiency. I do want to talk about how he could help them possibly. But before we get to the defensive side of Delon Wright, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. Which NFL stars move the betting line the most? Starting July 18th, Locked On gives you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers at BetOnline. Available July 18th on Locked On NFL, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, so let's get to the defensive side of the ball. As they say, defense wins championships. It's kind of debatable now in today's NBA, but how is Delon Wright defensively? Is he able to guard 1 through 3? And where did he rank as a defensive guard on the Hawks last year?
Yeah, I think that Delon is a very good defender. That's the broad strokes of it. He was arguably their best perimeter defender on the whole last year. DeAndre Hunter was the other option on that level for the Hawks, but I do think that Delon can guard 1 through 3. He doesn't have the greatest size to be guarding, the biggest threes in the world, but he's a legitimate 6'5". Like, he's a very, very good size for a point guard in particular, and he's very versatile. He's very strong. He's a really sort of instinctive defender as well. He was the one guy on the roster that can go sort of create steals and create deflections. And the way I like to say with Delon always is, like, he just knows what to do. Like, he's someone who does the little things very well. He's always in the right spot. And when you combine that with his playmaking ability defensively and his size, like, I think he's not like an uber elite defender. He's not changing your life like Gary Payton would, but I think that he is certainly a soundly above average defender. And I think that that's one of his calling cards, is that he can play with almost anybody in the backcourt because he can guard multiple positions.
Definitely. The Wizards need that. They need some versatility and length from their backcourt. Last year, they had Howell Neto, who's about 6 feet tall, Ish Smith, who's about 5'9". Delon Wright is about 6'3", 6'4". So he definitely brings some defensive versatility there. They probably will need him to, guard some 2s and 3s with Bradley Beal being on the court, helping him out defensively. So that's good to know. I know per 36, he averaged about 2.1 steals per game and a couple deflections as well. So Delon Wright really is a guy that can be a pest and get into the passing lanes as well. Nate McMillan did give him a vote of confidence as well, saying that he could see Delon Wright possibly making an all-defensive team. Do you see that in the near future for Delon Wright?
Probably not, just because he's not going to play enough. It's one of those things
Right.
where, like, if you just decided to play Delon Wright 33 minutes a game and like he was the guy he would be maybe on the fringe of that level. Like I think he really is very, very, very good defensively, but unless you are like super, super outlier productive in the role that he would have, it'd be really hard to do that. But Nate, that's not surprising that Nate said that. It's just one of those guys that's going to say that. I think he really valued Delon's defense. I think if you go through his career, I was trying to catch up before he came to Atlanta, going back and reading old quotes and from other coaches that have had him. Everybody loves his defense, and it's very easy to see why that is. Like, he's just, again, always in the right place, and that's the big thing that coaches love. Is just guys who won't screw up, and guys he never screws up, and he makes plays, and he has the size. So, like, probably not all defense level, but he is very good.
Mm-hmm. All right, and then more offensive about Delon. How is his shot creation?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest drawback, honestly, of Delon's game on offense. Not that he can't do it, but especially last year, part of that was role-based when he was playing some with Trey. Like, I think he had a career low usage rate last year. He's not the one probably issue that you would say that might have cost him playing time in Atlanta and other spots previously, especially if he's playing a lot of point guard, is that he's not the most aggressive creator in terms of like looking for his own shot. He goes through these spells where he'll pass up some good looks. He'll not necessarily go out of his way to create for his own. And while that's probably a good trait to have in a point guard a lot of the way, especially with a guy like Delon, who's not going to be a primary scorer for you, he does have a little bit of some passive issues. Like, he doesn't always he's not always as aggressive as you want him to be. So if there's one thing that you would say that maybe coaches don't love about Delon, is that he's not going to always have that aggressive hat on. He will pass up some stuff that will kind of frustrate you. He might give up an open three every once in a while. He might not look to take an open layup every once in a while if he's going to be driving to a spot where he gets maybe sort of having that hat on where he's looking to pass. So I think that if you're trying to find the one thing that he's not great at, it probably is just individual shot creation. He can make shots if he takes them, but he's not always the most aggressive guy.
Right. Yeah, it's so funny because when he played with the Raptors, he killed the Wizards in a playoff series where he was super, super aggressive. But playing with Kristaps Porzingis and Bradley Beal, I know the offense is going to be running through those guys. So how was Delon doing the pick and roll with the guys like John Collins and Clint Capella? How did that chemistry go, and how did that mesh?
Yeah, pretty well. I think that he, again, is not like he's not a uber elite creator with pick and roll, but he knows how to run one. He's certainly comfortable operating as the on-ball guy, dating back to college and early in his career with Toronto, et cetera. He used to be much more of an on-ball player than he has been recently, and that part of that's just role-based. Like, if he's playing with another point guard, like if you throw out there with Monty Morris, you're not going to have Delon run all of your pick and rolls. But if he's the primary guy out there to run pick and roll, he can certainly do that. He has good chemistry with Collins, with Capella, with Okongwu, and also, he's willing more than a lot of guys are that play point guard to get off the ball and cut. That's something I really like that I've not said so far, is that he's a really instinctual, like, he knows how to create space for others by cutting and kind of being in the right spot off the ball as well. So the chemistry stuff as a pick and roll player, he's not going to be, again, like the scoring pick and roll player, but he's certainly someone who's capable of diving guys up, finding lobs, finding those pocket passes, that kind of stuff. He's very comfortable in that role.
Mm-hmm. And how good was he in transition?
He's pretty good. I think that he's probably repeating myself a little bit. He's probably better as the number two guy in transition. Like, he's not going to be necessarily the most aggressive grab and go guy, but he can do that. And I think one of the big things in Atlanta is that once he was the only guard on the floor sometimes, like in the playoffs, he knows what he has to do if he's in that role. Like, if he's playing with Trae Young, if he's playing with Bradley Beal maybe in Washington, sometimes he may not have that aggressive thing sort of turned on in his brain. But when he knows that he has to create, he's a little bit better at doing so. He's more aggressive when he knows he has to do that. And I think that also applies to transition, where he will run the floor big time as a guy who fills lanes very well. And I think if he needs to, we've seen him do it enough where he can grab and go and push the pace. He's not necessarily the guy that I would think of first as a guy who, like, I would say excels in pushing the pace. He's more of a little bit of a slower point guard in terms of like his overall mindset, but he definitely can get it downhill when he wants to.
Definitely. And lastly, where did you see his fit with the Hawks, and how was chemistry? How was his chemistry? And did you get any vibes or sense of him as a player and as a person?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, to a man, everybody seems to love Delon. Obviously,
Hmm.
we're on the outside looking in, but I covered that team very closely this year, and between my interactions with him and between everybody that I asked about him organizationally, he's a guy that everybody seems to like quite a bit. Even when he, as he sort of alluded to what you said before, had kind of a smaller role that he didn't necessarily love, he did not let that affect the way he was preparing and did not become a problem in the locker room, even when he wasn't playing. Even when people like me on the outside were like, "Why is he not playing more?" He's not going to cause a ruckus. So, like, obviously, he's the backup in Washington, presumably behind Monty Morris. He's comfortable with that role. I think he knows what he is. He's a professional in a lot of different ways, and I think that basically, I've never heard a bad word about Delon Wright, which is the number one takeaway for me. Like, in addition to like the way he plays, which is a very team style that just checks a lot of boxes, he's also someone that just wants to win and wants to play well, and he clearly wants to play, and I think he should. That's probably one of the reasons why he didn't come back to Atlanta. But I do think that he's going to have a solid role in Washington, and I think he'll embrace it.
Definitely. Yeah, the Wizards are looking for high character guys. Tommy Shepard, the GM, has said that numerous times now. About the DeJounte Murray trade for you guys, how did you feel about that trade? And where do you feel like you guys will finish in the East or your ceiling? And how do you feel about the Washington Wizards outlook in the Eastern Conference as well?
Yeah, I think that the Murray trade was a big splash move for the Hawks. It makes them better. I've said before on my show, like this is the best roster the Hawks have had in terms of talent in the Trae Young, Travis Schlenk era, which may sound crazy because they made the conference finals, but this roster at the moment is more talented than that roster was. Does that mean that's going to be the same result? Maybe not, and I wouldn't pick that necessarily. But Murray is the best player that Trae Young's played with, so they paid a lot for him for sure. Like they did not get a bargain on that deal whatsoever. They gave up kind of a market value price, but he did exactly what they wanted. And in terms of what they were looking for, they talked about guys who wanted to sort of be number two creation options, also be able to defend at the point of attack. And especially with Delon leaving, they had to get somebody that can guard at the point of attack the way that Murray can. So I like that move a lot for the Hawks. It makes them better. I think that we've seen this already with our friends at BetOnline. They're kind of in that like 5-6 range in the East. And in terms of what's going to be projected for them, I kind of agree with that. It's hard to have them ahead of teams like Milwaukee or Boston or Miami or whoever, Philadelphia even. But somewhere in the middle of the East playoff race is kind of where I would have the Hawks. And, the Wizards are trying to get to that same spot too. I mean, I think that they kind of under the radar, I'm sure you talked about this a lot on your show, but like they were better than people thought they were last year, especially when you factor in like Beal being out as long as he was and Kristaps coming mid-season and all that stuff. Like the fact that they were able to win, in the mid-30s with all those challenges, that's a team that can be fairly dangerous in terms of like play-in plus kind of range this year. So I don't know how you feel about the Wizards, but I think the Wizards are going to be pretty competitive.
Yeah, I think the Hawks will be around that 5, 4, 6 range as well. The Wizards, it's just about health. Kristaps, of course, he's a huge question mark with health, staying healthy. Bradley Beal's got to play up to expectations, so it really goes from there. They made some moves. I definitely wanted them to be a little more aggressive and take a swing for a guy like a DeJounte Murray, but you guys took advantage of that. And I think the Wizards will be a solid team, but they're in that playing range, 7th, 6th seed. It's just the top half of the East is very competitive with Giannis and the Sixers and the Miami Heat. So it's not the East of the old. The East is definitely getting better and is super, super competitive. So it will be fun to see the Wizards play against the Hawks.
For sure. I will look forward to that matchup. And I think having DeLon back around, so I'm sure he'll get his tribute video when he comes back to Atlanta, as he should. He earned it. He's the guy that everybody loves. So that'll be fun.
Yeah. All right, Brad, I just want to thank you for coming on. Is there anything you want to promote?
Just Locked on Hawks. Same places you can find Locked on Wizards. Subscribe, rate, review, all that fun stuff. And we're always here. As you well know, we're still rolling multiple days a week, even in the off season. So we're having fun.